I will never put a donor before a voter or a lobbyist before a citizen. Instead, I will be a champion for the people. The establishment media doesn't cover what really matters in this country or what's really going on in people's lives. It's the narrative of the people who rigged the system, never the voice of the people. It's been rigged again. So again, it's not about me. It's never been about me. It's been about all the people in this country who don't have a voice. I am running to be your voice.
So some political observers noting that the content of tonight's speech had an unmistakable trait of a disciplined, poll-tested message. Perhaps the influence in part of his brand new campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway. Joining me now, Chris Starwalt, our Fox News digital politics editor, to reign all over this idea and go back to the issue of the polls, I imagine. Hello there, Chris. Good evening to you.
No, ma'am. Don't. That was a good speech. It was on message, and I definitely heard the voice of his new, I don't know what they, CEO, double CEO. They got too many layers now, but Steve Bannon, who came in this week.
Yeah.
I heard Steve Bannon's voice there. Nationalism, populism, with a message right at white working class voters, the people who Trump's counting on to propel him forward. And it's a message, and you heard it there. That could have been a Bernie Sanders rally. That wasn't a Republican message. That was a, we're screwed and we know who's doing it and we're going to go kill him. And so that was a good message.
It definitely was. And it was also a change election message, right? It was, you know, sort of throw out the bums, you know, things haven't been working the way that they're supposed to. But it's interesting because what we heard from him over the past few days before this campaign shakeup, Chris, was largely, you know, I'm going to, you know, Trump be Trump, right? I'm going to be myself. It was a little bit sort of, you know, an arrogance to that message. I'm going out the way I came in, and this is who I am. But tonight, and Michael Goodwin wrote an interesting editorial about this in the Post today, basically saying, look, if that's what you're going to do, and you're going to forget all those people who came out, you know, who said they never voted in their lives and showed up to see you in Manchester and Iowa and everywhere else, that's not a very good plan. What do you think?
Look, I think the most important thing he did in the speech tonight was to use the word regret. One of the things that got him off on the wrong foot with a lot of voters when he said he'd never asked for forgiveness in his life, except for when he drank the little wine and ate the little cracker. The deal for him was expressing regret for hurting people's feelings. He didn't say he was wrong. He just said that he was sorry, almost said that he was sorry. That's important for politicians to do. It's especially important for a politician who is widely perceived as being too arrogant. So that was a signal moment. And if he keeps that up, he can improve these dire polls that he's swimming under.
Yeah, we're going to play that moment for everybody, so stick around for that. And you're right. It was not an apology, which I said in the introduction. And we know he almost never apologizes. He's the first to admit it. But he said that he regretted that he'd hurt people's feelings. And we'll play that in just a second. Chris, thank you. Great to see you, as always. So also tonight, a big update from one of the country's most respected political analysts, the University of Virginia's Center for Politics, announcing this morning that Hillary Clinton sits in prime position to win the White House right now. But our next guest says that anything can happen over the next dozen weeks, which is about what we have left here. Joining me now, Director of UVA's Center for Politics, Larry Sabato. Larry, good evening to you. Tell us what's in your tea leaves and your crystal ball and your numbers right now, and put that up against what we've started to see over the past couple of days.
Absolutely. What we've got right now is a hard base for Hillary Clinton of about 273 electoral votes. This is the first time that we've had her over that critical 270, which is what you need to be elected president. She got it via New Hampshire. She got those 4 electoral votes because her base there has been rock solid, surprisingly so, even though Trump had carried that in the primary with a split vote. So 273 either safe Democratic or likely Democratic. Now, what about the others? Well, if you look at the leaning ones, which includes current polls that have her perhaps further ahead than she will be later in the campaign, you can get her all the way up to 348. 348. Wow. That's a lot further along. I'm the first to admit, though, she's got problems in Iowa, where she very narrowly leads, problems in Nevada, where it's either tied or she very narrowly leads, and there are a couple of big states, actually 3, that she needs to worry about: Florida, North Carolina, and Ohio. So she has work to do too, but I'm just going to be blunt with you. You'd much rather be in Hillary Clinton's position right now than you would want to be in Donald Trump's.
Yeah, and she has seemed very comfortable on the campaign trail over the past few days. She seems to feel like she's in a very good place. There have been stories that they're even backing off on some of their ad dollars in places like Pennsylvania. So she's feeling confident, no doubt. It'll be interesting to see what the impact of, sort of this change, I don't know if we can call it that quite yet, but development that we've seen over the past few days. What are you watching for? What are the big markers? The debates, of course, have to go into that mix, I would imagine, Larry.
Sure, the debates are key moments, but so are the unexpected ones. There are so many moments in a campaign nobody can see coming, and luck is such a big part of politics, and certainly presidential politics. So there can be moments that rearrange, reshuffle the campaign. I'm going to be looking, though, not just for those unexpected moments, but for the moments that show that Donald Trump maybe finally is listening to somebody like Kellyanne Conway, who has sense, and who perhaps can keep him more disciplined and focused on the issues like the economy and terrorism that might just possibly, under some circumstances, get him elected.
Well, that's what makes it interesting for you and for us and for everybody who's watching all of this. Larry, thank you very much. Good to see you, sir.
Nice to see you, too.
So over the course of the past year plus, Donald Trump has positioned himself really as a nominee who refuses to back down. He often doubles down, in fact, when he says something controversial. But tonight, listen to this.
Sometimes in the heat of debate and speaking on a multitude of issues, you don't choose the right words or you say the wrong thing. I have done that. And believe it or not, I regret it. Thank you. And I do regret it, particularly where it may have caused personal pain.
So Bill Bennett is with us tonight. He served as Education Secretary under President Reagan. He is the chairman of the Conservative Leaders for Education. Bill, what did you think about that tonight?
Oh, I think it was great. I think it was terrific. What was needed. The American people love that. They'd love to hear somebody say I was wrong. Let's move on. He did hit a note like that before, Martha. Remember when he spoke in his acceptance speech and talked about evangelical Christians giving him their blessing, and he said, I'm not sure I deserve it. This moment of humility, Shakespeare has a line in Coriolanus about wearing the gown of humility occasionally. He wore it, and then he took it off, put his suit back on. But I think this is going to travel well. Put in the context of the last three speeches, this is very strong. And I think he still has a very good shot at being president. Maybe I've played too many team sports, but I don't know why so many people are abandoning the field.
The numbers look rough, and he really, has never been ahead when you look at sort of the long curve of all these polls over the course of time. But you worked in the Reagan administration. Ronald Reagan made a big turnaround in the last several months of his campaign. Are there parallels, or is this more like Romney, which in Shakespearean terms would make Trump very upset because he has talked about the fact that Romney caved in a winnable election, and that ticked him off and may have motivated him big time. And he doesn't want to go down that road himself, does he?
Martha, the one person he is not like is Mitt Romney. I mean, I think in so many ways. Remember, the pundit said that he had a 1% chance when he started his campaign. This is a very unpredictable year. Look at what the polls have been the last few days. They have closed, and 2 points, 3 points, 4 points. Again, anybody ever played team sports out there? Let's get behind this guy. You're going to see, I've talked to some people, a barrage of advertising now, which he has not had. Remember that. He hasn't had his own advertising in the states, in the battleground states. A lot of people with deep pockets are going to put ads on in those states, and I think you're going to see a shift. But the most encouraging shift is from the candidate himself. Remember one other thing. People have had 25 years of Hillary Clinton. They know who she is. People might give this a second look. Now give Donald Trump a second look. Listen to that note he struck. You know, he admitted he was wrong. Maybe people will also come to the realization that a guy who says some things awkwardly, indecorously, infelicitously is not as big a problem as someone who's going to hurt the country permanently, putting things in the right context.
Who do you think is the biggest group that he needs to influence? Who does he need to pull over? Is it, suburban women who are concerned about security? Who's the group that you're watching, Bill?
The center, I think the center right, yes, suburban women, but also I think more of the evangelicals to get them out. I understand he's going to speak at the Family Research Council, or I'll be speaking. That's a great audience for him. But there's a lot of people in the middle, and there are still undecided people. He does not need to speak to the never-Trumpers, some of my friends or maybe former friends who suffer from the terrible case of moral superiority and put their own vanity and taste above the interest of the country. But he can speak to the middle, and he can speak to the problems, as he spoke in Milwaukee, and he can speak as he does to some audiences, particularly, Martha. A lot of that Milwaukee address was to Black America, and I think that's something he should do again. I think he can get 15-20% of that vote if he continues to hit the themes he was hitting that
in recent elections. Bill, thank you. It's always good to talk to you, sir. Thanks for coming by tonight. So Team Trump says that there is another thing that voters should not be trusting: Hillary Clinton's support for police. And as she holds an event with law enforcement right on the heels of one that he did as well yesterday, they have identical events. What's the message? We're going to talk to David Wohl and Julie Roginski about who law enforcement should really trust. Plus, after weeks of denials, the Obama administration admitting that a $400 million payment to Iran was indeed tied to the release of our American hostages. Charles Krauthammer says that's ransom, and it endangers all Americans. The battle for the blue vote is heating up today as Hillary Clinton holds a meeting with and praises U.S. law enforcement just one day after her opponent held a similar meeting of his own. But as Trump and Clinton trade barbs over their support for police, critics are pointing to the DNC's decision to feature the mother of Michael Brown, the man the DOJ says attacked an officer, and its failure to mention law enforcement in any great detail until day 3, essentially, of their event. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin joins us live with more on this tonight. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Martha. Well, campaign aides tell me that this meeting with police chiefs was planned for months. Hillary Clinton has been walking this very fine line between supporting the Black Lives Matter movement on the one hand, but also showing support for the police who put their lives on the line every day on the other hand. She was in New York today at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, challenging Trump's attempt to paint himself as the only law and order candidate. Hillary Clinton met with 8 police commissioners from Los Angeles to Dallas to Camden, New Jersey.
I believe supporting our police officers and improving policing go hand in hand. Everyone is safer when there is respect for the law and when everyone is respected by the law.
Yesterday, Trump accused Clinton of being against the police in her support of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Those peddling the narrative of cops as a racist force in our society, a narrative supported with a nod by my opponent, shared directly in the responsibility for the unrest in Milwaukee and many other places within our country.
After the meeting with the 8 police chiefs, retiring New York Police Commissioner Bill Bratton defended Clinton.
Before, during, and after the meeting, I'll speak for myself, I don't believe that the Secretary is against police at all. I think she's solidly for police.
Does Donald Trump scare you, sir?
That scares me. From LA.
Earlier this month, Chief Bratton said a Trump presidency gave him pause.
Mr. Trump scares the hell out of me. The lack of depth on issues, that the shoot from the hip, I just watched this whole campaign and I just shake my head.
Most of the police chiefs today chose not to speak to the press because they didn't want to appear partisan. Martha?
All right, Jennifer, thank you. So joining me now to talk about this, David Wohl. He's an attorney and a Trump supporter, and Julia Ginsky, a Democratic analyst and Fox News contributor. Welcome to both of you. So, good morning. I mean, good evening. I'm used to being on in the morning, but good evening to you both, because we're still here. Julie, what's your take? You know, yesterday we saw Donald Trump at a large table with Rudy Giuliani and Michael Flynn and a lot of law enforcement and terror specialists, you know, listening to what they had to say. And there was a big show of law enforcement at the convention, the Republican convention, over the summer. And now Hillary Clinton seems to be wanting a piece of that support as well.
Well, I don't know if she's wanting a piece of that support. I mean, don't forget the night that she spoke, which is the biggest night of the convention, she featured people who had lost loved ones to law enforcement, including the sheriff of Dallas County, or the county in Dallas, where Dallas is located, where you had that awful, awful shooting. So it's not a new thing for her. But look, the big difference here is this. You can support the police. You can support what they do. You can support the fact that they put their lives on the line every day for all of us. And also support the notion that sometimes police take action that's not necessarily proper or appropriate. And the best thing to do is to bring both sides together to figure out the best way to enforce policing or to prevent those kinds of things from happening. What you see with Donald Trump, unfortunately, is only an attack on anybody who disagrees with anything that he says, including people who might have a legitimate grievance with the police, including minority communities. So, you know, it's not a my way or the highway situation here. You can support both and try to improve both without having to cast blame on anybody specifically, which is what she's doing.
I think about Rudy Giuliani, who's one of his top advisors, who says time and again, you know, that when there is a bad cop, it's a rare situation in most cases, but that person needs to be prosecuted. And in most of the cases that we've all covered and talked about so much, that's exactly what has happened. But what you want to be wary of is painting with a broad brush the people who are there to keep us safe. I think that is, you know, sort of the overwhelming criticism of Hillary Clinton in this story, David, and you know, no doubt that's probably where you're coming from on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a core critical American value, Martha. I mean, national security, personal security, the security of your family, and that's what law enforcement provides. And frankly, when Hillary Clinton, when there's an officer-involved shooting, a high-profile case, Hillary Clinton's default position is to side with the alleged bad guy. Donald Trump's default position is to side with law enforcement until and unless he's proven wrong. Now, that's just so critical when it comes down to the feeling of every American who wants security, who wants law enforcement to be on their side. And I thought another interesting soundbite of Hillary Clinton's address to these 8 police chiefs today was she was talking about the horrible mass shooting in Dallas, the horrible mass shooting in New Orleans, where 8 total cops were massacred by psychopathic mass murdering gunmen. And her response was, and I'm quoting here, that there is work ahead to repair bonds of trust. So she's almost drawing a moral equivalency between these mass murderers and the cops that they killed. And that's the default position she takes far too often. It's a dangerous one, and that's why so many cops, and I know a ton of cops working in the criminal justice system for 27 years, I don't know a single one who's voting for Hillary Clinton.
I got to tell you
very quickly, Julie.
Just the fact that you assume that somebody who got shot by a cop is automatically a bad guy just completely underscores the problem that Donald Trump and his supporters have.
I thought I said alleged bad guy.
No, you didn't say alleged at all, my friend. You said bad guy, and that's the problem.
That's absolutely what I said.
No,
that's
well,
absolutely
what I said.
Thank you to both of you. Good to have you here tonight. So new reports that 2 U.S. Olympians are headed home after being questioned by police in Brazil, but one athlete is still in Rio, and he is under threat of indictment. Trace Gallagher has the latest details on that, plus a sharp reversal by the Obama administration, now saying that the release of U.S. hostages by Iran was indeed tied to the $400 million payment to the Islamic regime. Charles Krauthammer joins us on that next. Breaking tonight, a major admission from the Obama administration over the controversial payout of $400 million to Iran to get hostages back in January. Here is video of what's purported to be the money wrapped in cellophane. Look at this. Isn't that incredible? Delivered in an unmarked cargo plane to Tehran. It was handed over at nearly the same moment. In fact, the reports are that they waited for this plane to arrive before they released 5 American hostages. Critics say that adds up to ransom. A charge President Obama flatly denied a couple of weeks ago, but one that the State Department, under some pretty strong questioning today, Rear Admiral John Kirby basically gave that idea confirmation.
In basic English, you're saying that you wouldn't give them the $400 million in cash until the prisoners were released, correct?
That's correct.
We do not pay ransom. We didn't here, and we won't in the future. Precisely because if we did, then we would start encouraging Americans to be targeted.
In moments, we'll be joined by Charles Krauthammer, but first, Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen was in that briefing room today, and he has the latest from the State Department.
Martha, good evening. For weeks, the Obama administration has maintained that this secret payment in hard foreign currency of $400 million to Iran on the very same day when that country was setting free 5 American hostages was totally unrelated, that the two events proceeded along entirely separate diplomatic tracks. Now, prodded by a second bombshell story in the Wall Street Journal, aides to Secretary of State John Kerry admit that they withheld this payment, part of a $1.7 billion settlement with Iran over frozen assets, until the U.S. was certain our hostages were on their way home.
Obviously, when you're inside that 24-hour period and you already now have concerns about the end game in terms of getting your Americans out, it would have been foolish, imprudent, irresponsible for us not to try to maintain maximum leverage. If you're asking me, was there a connection in that regard at the end game, I'm not going to deny that.
But just 2 weeks ago, the State Department insisted that the resolution of the Iran nuclear talks, this prisoner release, and the resolution of this financial dispute all converged coincidentally.
There was no linkage between this settlement and the freeing of these Americans, but we saw an opportunity to resolve these 3 separate pieces concurrently that were being resolved at the same time.
Tonight, critics of the Obama administration say the Iranian regime will only be emboldened by the way this payment was structured and by the new disclosures from the State Department.
It was ransom. We now know it was ransom. And on top of that, it put more American lives at risk. And we now know that they transferred that $400 million into the hands of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is a terrorist organization.
And Chairman Royce told me today that the House Foreign Affairs Committee will be summoning administration witnesses to his panel for hearings on this subject, Martha.
All right, more to come. Here now, Charles Krauthammer, Fox News contributor and author of Things That Matter. Charles, good evening to you. This is a troubling series of events, to say the least.
Well, I think it's been obvious from the very beginning that it was ransom. It was obvious when the story broke just a few weeks ago. When one of the hostages said that they were detained, they waited to be released from Iran until the money had arrived, or at least the plane carrying the money had taken off. This was obviously a ransom. From the very beginning, it was just embarrassing for the administration and even for the president to have to deny it. It's almost as if for this administration, some words are magical and they can't be pronounced lest something terrible happen. Radical Islamic terrorism, you're not allowed to say that. The word Islamic has some kind of magical property to it that if you say it, the world has changed. And here it's, of course it was an exchange. Look, we exchanged 5 jihadists in return for one of our soldiers, the Bergdahl deal. We're exchanging money. Other countries have done it. We have done it. We will do it in the future. They simply didn't want to admit it. But to me, the real scandal is the Iran deal itself, the deal that's behind this, the one that was attached to it, where we've had all kinds of instances of denials and lies and pretense in selling the deal to the American people. Yeah. That will be with us for a very long time.
You know, it seems to me, this was sort of the end game in the whole thing, the final payoff. So they said, we want our money. And we said, according to this, what we learned today, well, we want the hostages, right? So why wasn't this a precursor to even sitting down in the first place, Charles? These people had been held for some time. We did stories on it. Other places did stories on it. We interviewed their family members. We interviewed the newspaper whose editor was being held. Why wasn't this the opening question? If you let these people go, and then we will sit down and talk to you.
I think you're absolutely right. When you think about all the things that we gave away all the elements of the deal that we caved in on.
Yeah.
Inspection of the military facility at Parchin, these notifications, which are essentially a month long, etc. It goes on forever. The retention of their nuclear infrastructure. All of that was given away along the way. But the one that sticks out, the one that's the most obvious, the one that we should have begun with 5 years ago when the negotiations were even begun to talk about, was if you don't release our guys, we're not talking. The Iranians were in dire economic straits.
That's right.
The economy was in collapse. They needed us, and we negotiated everything away, essentially for very, very little.
And they were still holding these people at the very end, and this was the last card that we had to give back that money. And then remember that they took the sailors shortly after that, and that was a huge fiasco as well. So it opened the door to this kind of behavior, perhaps even further. I want to play another piece of video that's getting a lot of attention today, Charles, because it really reminds us all of what's going on in Syria. Let's take a look at this little boy whose name is Omran. You know, when I first saw this, Charles, I didn't think it was real. You know, that orange background and that little child covered, and he wipes his face and sees blood on his hand and wipes it on the seat, as any child would do, and he's just obviously stunned. He's said to be 5 years old. He looks a little bit younger than that, but that's the exact period of time that you go back to the Red Line. His entire life has been spent in Aleppo in this kind of chaos and this kind of crazy bombing environment. His family's okay and he's okay, I want to point out. But what's the meaning of this in your mind today?
Well, look, as Americans, you have to think, what was our hand in this? Obviously, nothing direct. This is the work of a savage regime that kills its own people. The Iranians who joined and supported them. Hezbollah, which is also in the fight. And, of course, the Russians who have weighed in very heavily to protect the regime. But in the end, there's also the United States. We had been the dominant power in the region, and we said, in describing the horrible conditions, the atrocities, the crimes against humanity that we described, we deplored again and again in very real, very touching terms, and then we did nothing. Secretary of State delivered an impassioned speech on the eve of what was supposed to be our retaliation for the use of chemical weapons, which Obama has said was his line, the ultimate line that could not be crossed. He gave an impassioned speech saying how humanity is watching us, history is watching us, we cannot turn away, and we did. This will remain on our conscience in the same way that President Clinton has a sense that he has some of the killing in Rwanda, the carnage in Rwanda on his.
Yeah.
This will remain with us for a long time.
Well, you're right, and the president was right. History would be watching us, and they continue to watch us and our behavior and our allowance of the hundreds of thousands of people now who have died in Syria, while President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton said that Assad must go and that it must happen immediately. That was 5 years ago, the whole lifespan of that child. Charles, thank you very much. Good to have you with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. And breaking news tonight, 2 American swimmers detained in Brazil are expected to return home to the United States tonight as we get new surveillance video of what really happened. And it's interesting. Plus, deadly flooding is devastating Louisiana, with the president now coming under fire for not going to tour the damage and be with the people there. Evangelical leader Tony Perkins is here with his personal story from the devastation. Breaking tonight, it's being called the worst natural disaster since Superstorm Sandy. 13 people have lost their lives. Thousands, 11,000 are in shelters right now, according to the latest numbers, due to the severe flooding in Louisiana. And now President Obama's response to the tragedy is also being questioned. In just a moment, Family Research Council President Tony Perkins is here to tell his own story about what's happening to him there. But first, we go to Trace Gallagher in our West Coast newsroom for more on the political side. Hi, Trace.
Hey, Martha, many have argued that even presidents need some time to unwind, but critics, including the Baton Rouge Advocate newspaper, say if Mr. Obama can interrupt his vacation to attend a high-end fundraiser for Hillary Clinton, as he did this week, he could certainly find time to pay a visit to those suffering in Louisiana. The White House says the president told Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards that Baton Rouge can count on his prayers and unwavering support. But an image of the president golfing on Martha's Vineyard, put side by side with people being rescued from some of the 40,000 homes damaged in the flooding, has struck a nerve, evoking memories of 2005 when a then vacationing George W. Bush flew over the catastrophic aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. At the time, the media tore into President Bush's decision not to land the plane and support the victims, saying he lacked compassion. But now the media reasoning for no visit by Obama to Baton Rouge seems to be that presidential visits get in the way of emergency responders and does more harm than good. The Advocate disagrees, quoting, "A disaster this big begs for the personal presence of the president at ground zero. In coming here, the president can decisively demonstrate that Louisiana's recovery is a priority for his administration and the United States of America." So far, there are no plans for the president to end his vacation early and no claims that he doesn't care about the people on the ground.
Okay.
Martha.
All right, Trace, thank you. Let's bring in Tony Perkins, who is one of the thousands of Louisiana residents forced to evacuate his home this week. The evangelical leader's East Baton Rouge Parish home looks like this now, surrounded by 10 feet of water. That was when they made the decision to pile everybody into a canoe and bring his wife and 5 children to safety. Mr. Perkins joins me now, president of the Family Research Council. Tony, good evening. Good to have you with us. I'm sorry for what you and so many in Louisiana are going through.
Well, thank you, Martha. We are now dry, and the water is receded here. It's still flooding in South Louisiana. And the process of recovery and all of the stuff that goes into that takes place. And there are folks on the ground doing that. We've got a lot of faith-based organizations. One of the first calls I made was to Samaritan's Purse, and they were here within 48 hours. And they're now today helping people clean out their homes and begin this, what's going to be a long process of rebuilding.
You know, in terms of the attention that's being paid to this, we are in the middle of an election cycle. There's a lot of focus on Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Being in the middle of it, and we have tried to, cover it as much as we can. We've been doing it pretty much in every show, but there's a lot out there. Do you feel, as somebody who's experiencing this firsthand, that people aren't paying attention and that the president isn't doing all he could?
Well, I think the president has a role, but it's a limited role. I was here. I was a part of the relief effort in Katrina. I remember the criticism that George Bush had. I was talking with Karl Rove in the White House as I was trying to rescue people out of New Orleans. I was here for Gustav. We've had our share of storms here in Louisiana. The government has a role. I have to say, Bobby Jindal, when he was governor and handled Gustav and the oil spill, I thought did very well in executing emergency response that was appropriate for government. You have to make room for the private sector, for the faith community, and for neighbor helping neighbor. Now, the government has a role, and it has a rightful role. One of the things the president can do is show that it's important. And that's why I think the criticism of George Bush took him 3 days. We're going on 6 days, and we've not heard from Barack Obama. And it's important that the government prioritizes the needs of the people. And just by doing that, it encourages other Americans to help out their fellow citizens.
Well, George Bush, we know, said it was a big mistake to fly over, and that, even given a presidential visit, it would have made sense in his mind to land and to show support. President Obama, John Bel Edwards, has said he believes it's not the right time and that the president should come in a week or 2. So we'll see how all of that works out. Tony, we wish you and your family well. You're going through a tough time, as so many people are in Louisiana, and we will be thinking about you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Martha. Encourage people to pray for the folks in Louisiana as they rebuild.
Yeah. We sure will. Absolutely right. Thank you to him. So this tonight as well, another story that we have covered today and has breaking news this evening. U.S. Olympic swimmers threatened with indictment in Brazil, and one of them is still in the country. And Trace joins us once again with the background on that. Plus, trial attorney Mark Eiglarsh and sports editor Mike Bako are here on the trouble facing these athletes and whether or not they should be banned from Olympic competition in the future when we come back. So dramatic new developments in the story of 4 American Olympic swimmers who originally claimed to be robbed at gunpoint by Brazilian police. Remember that story? But this is the surveillance video of what actually happened. And it's clear that they twisted the truth and that they could soon face some charges because of it. Trace Gallagher has the backstory on today's developments from our newsroom in the West Coast. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Martha, Fox News has now confirmed that both Ryan Lochte and Jimmy Fegan have been indicted for false communication of a crime. In other words, lying to police. Only Lochte and Fegan were indicted because only they initially spoke to police. If a judge accepts the indictment, it would likely result in a fine. If a judge does not accept the indictment, the matter would end. But we now know that Ryan Lochte's first account of what happened is riddled with inaccuracies, to put it mildly. For example, the taxicab was not pulled over and a gun was never put to Lochte's forehead. In fact, after partying all night, the 4 American swimmers stopped at a gas station where police say they vandalized a bathroom and urinated on the floor. When they tried to get in their taxi cab and leave, police say security guards with guns forced them out of the car and to sit on a sidewalk. Police say a gun was pointed at Lochte to contain him because he appeared upset. And eventually the swimmers gave the guards money voluntarily, says police, to repair the damages to the bathroom. But Lochte still maintains that if you pull somebody out of a car at gunpoint and take their cash, that's robbery. And today the chief of the Rio Civilian Police acknowledged that the Olympic swimmers might have viewed the guns as threatening. Watch.
But your question is, was it excessive, the use of that weapon? Maybe yes, maybe not. It depends on the circumstances. But up until now, nothing indicates an excessive use of the weapons.
The other 2 swimmers involved, Gunnar Bentz and Jack Conger, are now at the Rio airport about to fly back to the U.S. They might be airborne by now. Jimmy Fegan is still in Brazil waiting for the judge's ruling. And as we know, Ryan Lochte is already home.
That's got to be a little uncomfortable for Jimmy Fegan. He's probably anxious to get home. Thank you, Trace. Here now, Mark Eiglarz, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor, and Mike Bako is a sports editor for the Daily Journal, the Daily National. Thank you for being here, both of you. Mark, so Jimmy Fegan should have been told by his buddy Ryan Lochte, come on, let's catch this plane out of here, because he's still stuck there. What's going to happen to him?
Well, listen, what should happen to all these guys hinges upon what they do starting now. If I'm representing all of these guys, especially Ryan, I don't have him walk to the nearest camera. I have him swim as fast as he can, look everyone in the eyes, and apologize profusely. To spin this any other way, it would be tripling down. He's got to say he screwed up. He lied to Mom. She told the world, and then it just got out of control. And he apologizes.
And you think it's over? And Fegan, do you think he's going to be on his way back home? They said a fine is probably the worst thing that can happen to him. Mark?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're asking me?
Yeah. Sticking with the legal side. What's the worst that can happen to Fegan at this point?
I think the worst is going to be heavy fines. I think that they're upset. I think that the world is going to point their finger at the United States because they're going to say that this behavior somehow is indicative of how we behave, which it's not. It's an isolated incident. But yeah, I think that heavy fines will be levied.
Yeah, it doesn't reflect well on the U.S. And there have been so many great moments for us in these Olympics. It's too bad that this sort of tarnishes it. Mike, how bad is this in terms of the future for their careers?
Well, I think when you look at Lochte, he's really the only one that has a future career as an endorser. He's got some endorsement deals right now with Speedo, with Ralph Lauren, with a mattress company. So it's really hard for Lochte to look into his endorsement future and think that any company would want to partner with him right now. Ralph Lauren has come out with a statement, said that they're standing by him, same with Speedo, same with the mattress company. But if you're a brand, as an endorser, you want someone like Michael Phelps, Katie Ledecky, even Nathan Adrian, one of the other men's swimmers. You don't want Ryan Lochte. I mean, this is a reality star turned, almost Olympic embarrassment.
Can he fix it, though?
I don't get that, Martha.
Go ahead.
Martha, I don't understand that. They're sticking by him? Wait a second. We've established now that he was involved in some vandalism. He lied to law enforcement. He lied during 2 interviews. They're all about having athletes that have squeaky clean images. This is the opposite of that, and now they're sticking by him. I find that to be very unusual and I think very short-sighted.
It might be short-sighted, but these are brands that don't want to make even more headlines. They're probably embarrassed that they're even having to make comments and statements to this. So the fact that Ralph Lauren may say that they're standing by him, we're not going to be seeing Ryan Lochte in any sort of Ralph Lauren ads or any of these other sponsorship ads moving forward.
I think you're right. Fess up, confess what you did, and apologize, and move on, and say thank you to Brazil, and I can go a long way at this point. Thanks, you guys. Good to have you both here tonight.
Thanks, Martha.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more on the Kelly File after this. Thank you for watching tonight. I'm Martha McCallum. This is the Kelly File, and I will see you tomorrow morning on America's Newsroom with Bill Hemmer. Have a good night, everybody. See you early in the morning. Take care.